I'll never forget the sight of Patricia Peton, president of the Riverside Grove HOA, being handcuffed on her own doorstep at 12:03 a.m. The blue and red lights from the police cruisers reflected off her perfectly manicured lawn, illuminating the shocked faces of neighbors who had gathered in their robes and slippers. She stood there in her monogrammed bathrobe, still clutching the leather-bound binder she called her enforcement Bible, her voice shrill as she protested. But they refused to pay the mandatory fountain restoration fee, she screeched as the officer guided her toward the patrol car. The officer's response was calm and measured. "Ma'am, creating fraudulent legal documents is a felony, regardless of your intentions. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment I dared to utter the one word that would unravel Patricia's carefully constructed empire of petty tyranny. That word was simply, no. My name is David Harrison and I'm a 43-year-old software engineer who moved to Riverside Grove 6 months ago after accepting a position at a tech firm downtown. I chosen this neighborhood specifically for its quiet streets and mature trees, hoping to find some peace after years of apartment living. What I hadn't factored into my decision was Patricia Peton, a woman who ran the HOA like it was her personal kingdom. Patricia was the kind of person who wore pearls to check her mailbox and carried a measuring tape to ensure everyone's grass was regulation height. She had steel gray hair styled in a helmet-like bob that never moved, even in wind. And she wore oversized sunglasses year-round, which she dramatically removed whenever she wanted to emphasize a point. Her husband, Gerald, was a silent figure who seemed to exist solely to nod in agreement with whatever she said. The trouble started 3 weeks after I moved in. Patricia appeared at my door on a Saturday morning, clipboard in hand, wearing a blazer despite the August heat. She informed me with a practiced smile that the HOA had voted to install a $30,000 fountain at the neighborhood entrance, and each household would be assessed a mandatory fee of $800. I politely asked to see the meeting minutes where this vote had taken place. Her smile faltered slightly as she told me those were confidential HOA board documents. When I mentioned that HOA meeting minutes were supposed to be available to all residents, she assured me this was a special case involving aesthetic emergency protocols. That should have been my first red flag, but I was new and didn't want to make waves. Still, $800 for a fountain seemed excessive, especially since I just spent most of my savings on the down payment for the house. I told her I'd need to review the HOA bylaws before agreeing to any special assessment. Patricia's demeanor shifted instantly. Her fake smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure indignation. "Mr. Harrison," she said, pronouncing my name like it left a bad taste in her mouth. "In Riverside Grove, we don't question HOA decisions. We support our community." I maintain my polite tone. "I absolutely support the community, Patricia. I just like to understand the process better before writing a check." She left my porch that day with a warning that non-compliance has consequences, which seemed overly dramatic for a conversation about a fountain. Over the next few weeks, I discovered I wasn't alone in my skepticism. My neighbor Tom Fitzgerald, a retired accountant, mentioned that Patricia had been pushing through increasingly expensive improvements over the past 2 years. Another neighbor, Susan Delgado, told me she'd been fined $200 for having her trash cans visible from the street for 30 minutes after pickup. Still, I tried to stay under the radar while I researched. I requested a copy of the HOA bylaws from Patricia, who claimed they were being updated and unavailable. I asked about attending the next board meeting, only to be told it was for board members only. Every attempt to engage with the proper channels was blocked. Then the harassment began. First, I received a violation notice for excessively vibrant flowers in my front garden. The fine was $75. A week later, another notice arrived citing me for parking my car slightly crooked in my own driveway. Another $75. When I didn't pay these ridiculous fines, late fees were added. The petty citations continued to pile up. My mailbox was apparently 3 and too far from the regulation distance from the curb. My porch light was the wrong shade of white. I had too many solar lights along my walkway. Each violation came with a fine, and each fine came with increasingly threatening language about liens and legal action. Meanwhile, Patricia continued her door-to-door campaign for the fountain fee, telling neighbors that I was a troublemaker who was trying to destroy property values. She held a special meeting, which I later learned was just her, Gerald, and her friend Nancy Blackwood, where they voted to increase the fountain fee to $1,000 due to administrative delays caused by uncooperative residents. That's when I decided to do some real digging. I spent a weekend at the county courthouse pulling property records and HOA documentation. What I found was shocking. The original HOA had been properly established when the neighborhood was built in 1998, but the legal registration had lapsed in 2018. The renewal paperwork had never been filed. For the past 6 years, Patricia had been running an HOA that didn't legally exist. Armed with this information, I consulted with a lawyer friend who confirmed my suspicions. Every fine, every fee, every lien threat Patricia had issued wasn't just invalid, it was fraud. She'd been collecting money under false pretenses using the threat of legal action that she had no authority to pursue. I tried one more time to handle things quietly. I sent Patricia a certified letter explaining what I discovered and suggesting we work together to properly re-establish the HOA through legal channels. I even offered to help with the paperwork. Her response came at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday night. I was getting ready for bed when I heard pounding on my door. Patricia stood on my porch, eyes wild, waving a stack of papers. "You think you're so smart," she hissed, shoving the papers at me. They were covered in legal-looking stamps and seals. "These are official HOA enforcement documents. You owe $16,000 in fines and fees, and if you don't pay by midnight, I'm calling the police to have you arrested for theft of community services." I looked at the papers more closely. They were laughably fake, clearly printed on her home computer with clip art seals and forged signatures. One document claimed to be from the state HOA Enforcement Division, which doesn't exist. "Patricia," I said calmly, "these documents are forged. You can't arrest someone for not paying HOA fees, and you certainly can't do it when the HOA isn't legally registered." Her face turned purple. "We'll see about that," she snarled, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling 911 right now. They'll see who's really committing fraud here." I let her make the call. I stood in my doorway, arms crossed, as she dramatically told the dispatcher about a dangerous resident refusing to comply with legal orders and threatening the safety of the community through financial terrorism. 20 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived. Patricia met them in my driveway, gesticulating wildly as she explained how I was destroying the neighborhood by refusing to pay my fair share. She showed them her fake documents, insisting they were legally binding and demanding they arrest me immediately. Officer Rodriguez, a patient woman who looked like she'd dealt with similar situations before, asked to speak with me. I invited both officers inside and calmly presented my findings. I showed them the lapsed HOA registration, the forged documents Patricia had just given me, and a folder containing all the fraudulent fines she'd issued to multiple neighbors. The officers exchanged glances. Officer Chen asked to see Patricia's documents again, this time examining them under his flashlight. The more he looked, the deeper his frown became. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez said to Patricia, "can you show us the legal authority that allows you to issue these fines?" Patricia's confident facade began to crack. "The HOA charter gives me full enforcement authority." She stammered. "The HOA that hasn't been legally registered since 2018? Officer Chen asked. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Then she made a fatal error. "Fun," she snapped. "Maybe some of the paperwork isn't perfect, but I have proof of everything on my computer at home. Years of records showing all the violations and fees these people owe." The officers asked if she'd be willing to show them these records. Patricia, still believing she was in the right, agreed immediately. We all walked to her house where she booted up her laptop with a flourish. What the officers found was damning. Spreadsheets detailing made-up fines for dozens of neighbors. Template documents for creating fake legal notices. A folder labeled Enforcement Tactics containing step-by-step instructions for intimidating residents into compliance. Most damning of all was an email thread between Patricia and Nancy discussing how to divide the fountain money between themselves once it was collected. Officer Rodriguez placed Patricia under arrest for fraud, forgery, and extortion. The look of shock on her face as the handcuffs clicked shut was something I'll never forget. She kept insisting this was all a misunderstanding, that she was just trying to maintain property values, that the neighborhood would fall apart without her. As they led her to the patrol car, neighbors began emerging from their houses. Tom Fitzgerald actually applauded. Susan Delgado shouted, "About time!" Someone else yelled, "Can we get our money back?" The next morning, news of Patricia's arrest spread through Riverside Grove like wildfire. My phone rang nonstop with neighbors sharing their own stories of harassment and bogus fines. We organized a meeting, a real one this time, where we discovered Patricia had collected over $80,000 in fraudulent fees over 6 years. Local news picked up the story. Fake HOA president arrested for fraud became the headline that Patricia's mugshot appeared under. The reporter interviewed several neighbors, including elderly Mrs. Watanabe, who Patricia had fined $300 for having a bird bath that was attracting undesirable wildlife. The investigation revealed even more disturbing details. Patricia had used HOA funds to pay for personal vacations, jewelry, and a kitchen renovation. She'd filed false liens against 3 homes, causing real financial hardship for the families involved. One couple had almost lost their home because banks wouldn't approve their refinancing with a fraudulent lien on the property. During her trial, Patricia tried to maintain that she was just a dedicated community volunteer who'd made some bookkeeping errors. The prosecutor presented evidence of forged documents, embezzled funds, and years of systematic fraud. Her lawyer argued for leniency, claiming she'd been under stress and had good intentions. The judge wasn't buying it. Patricia Peton was convicted on 12 counts of fraud, 6 counts of forgery, and 8 counts of extortion. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution of $120,000, which included all the fraudulent fines plus damages. As the judge read the sentence, Patricia finally broke down. The woman who terrorized our neighborhood with her petty tyranny sobbed uncontrollably, still muttering about property values as court officers led her.